everyone, and welcome to video 1 in chapter 2.7, Role of Government in Microeconomics. This is the 7th chapter in microeconomics, and I normally teach 2.7, 2.8, 2.9 together. This is where we're going to see market failure and what the government can do about it. So the syllabus looks like this. We've basically got 4 types of government intervention. We've got price ceiling, price floor, indirect taxes and subsidies, and we've got a couple of others that we'll look at. We're going to do a diagram for them. We've got some HL content, and then we've got to look at the reasons for government intervention in the market. And what I'll do is I'll match these to the specific intervention that we do. So what is government intervention? Well, we've looked at the free market so far. We've looked at supply and demand, we've looked at the market equilibrium, we've done elasticities, and in general, free market economies do a reasonable job of allocating resources. So we saw that supply and demand determines how much producers produce, and therefore that decides how resources are allocated. Now, this term free market economies do a reasonable job. Different people, different economists will kind of have different opinions on this, so I've left it deliberately vague with the word reasonable. However, sometimes supply and demand does not lead to the best allocation of resources. We call this market failure, and this is actually the next chapter we're going to do. Some examples are pollution, cigarettes, but we're going to look at lots of different examples. And in these markets, the government may choose to intervene, which specifically means to change the outcome in the market. So they might change the quantity, they might change the price, but the different interventions that we look at are going to change the market in different ways. And like I said, we're going to look at 4 of them: price ceilings, price floors, indirect taxes and subsidies. And for each of these, we need to define them. We need to draw a diagram and look at how they impact the market and different stakeholders in the market, such as consumers, producers, governments, etc., etc. So we're going to do 4 videos. In this first video, we're going to do price ceiling, probably my favorite one, I think, overall. So this is a price control. So it's called a price control because the government is going to be controlling the price. And the government's going to set a maximum price for a good or service in order to stop producers selling for a price above it. So the idea is the government's trying to lower the price in the market. And the aim is to help certain customers or consumers who are on lower incomes. So one example might be rent control. This is like the classic example of a price ceiling. This is where the rents that consumers pay landlords for apartments is going to have some sort of maximum price. But we also see them in things such as basic necessities, such as food. And the idea here is that the government's trying to lower the price so that low-income consumers can buy more of it. But there's going to be various implications that we're going to see later on. So let's look at the diagram. So the diagram looks like this. We've got a normal supply and demand diagram, but here the government's going to impose a price ceiling of $20 in the market. So looking at the diagram, the equilibrium price is $40, which is the intersection of supply and demand, and the equilibrium quantity is 25. So when the government comes in and says, well, producers, you cannot sell for a price higher than $20. So when we do the diagram, we're going to draw a horizontal line across. I've called it PC for price ceiling. And this is going to have various implications that we're going to go through now. So yeah, the producers cannot raise the price above $20. So at $20, we now have a situation. At $20, we go across. We can see we go across to the demand curve. We can see that quantity demanded is 35. Quantity supplied is where we go across to the supply curve, we get 15, and therefore there is a shortage or excess demand in the market of 20. And that's the first implication of this price ceiling. So we now go through the implications onto different stakeholders. The first one is good. Some consumers can now pay a lower price. So previously, all consumers were paying 40. And now some consumers are only paying 20. So the idea of the price ceiling is it helps certain low-income consumers. So some consumers are able to benefit by buying up this 15 that producers are willing to sell. However, we now have the shortage created that we talked about on the previous slide. And this creates a rationing problem. So what do I mean by that? Well, without the price ceiling, if there's a shortage, remember, then we know in the market the price will go up back to equilibrium so that we can balance supply and demand. But now the price cannot go up because of the price ceiling. It's illegal for producers to sell for a higher price. So therefore we need some other method of deciding who can get the product. So some consumers cannot buy the product and queues may form. So because of the shortage, then consumers are going to be trying to get the product. There's likely to be queues. And then additionally, producers may be able to choose who to sell to. So what do we mean by that? Well, producers are selling 15 and there's this queue of consumers. So it's all of these consumers that want to buy the product. So producers are going to be able to have some sort of control over who to sell to. And additionally, we may end up with a black market. And the reason for that is because there's a shortage, consumers are willing to pay a higher price for it. So in the black market, this is an illegal market. It's possible that consumers may be willing to buy for a higher price and therefore they can find that from producers. The black market is obviously illegal because it's illegal to sell for a higher price, but there's certainly this incentive. Next up, we can see that producers lose revenue. So at the previous equilibrium of 40.25, the producer revenue was $40 times 25, which is $1,000. But after the price ceiling, they can now sell 20 and they're only willing to sell 15. So therefore the producer revenue will go down to $300. So producers are selling less and they're selling at a lower price. So clearly producers are being harmed by the price ceiling. So moving on to the next impact in the market, we can look at the impact on consumer surplus and producer surplus. And we're going to see that a welfare loss is created. So what we can do is we can look at producer and consumer surplus. We will do this a lot more in chapter 2.8, but I'll just go through this briefly here. So before the price ceiling, the producer surplus was A plus B plus E, so this triangle plus B and E. And then producer surplus afterwards is just A because the price comes down to 20. If you're not sure about producer and consumer surplus, go back and look at video 2.3 where we go through about how to calculate that. So consumer surplus before the price ceiling was C plus D, and afterwards it's now C plus B. C remains, but because the price has gone down to 20, consumers are able to gain this box B. So therefore the consumer surplus before is C, A plus B plus C plus D plus E, and then afterwards it's only A plus B plus C. So therefore we lose D plus E, and that's because in the market we're only trading 15, whereas at equilibrium we're trading 25. So therefore D plus E was previously consumer surplus, and now we can say that community surplus is decreased, and therefore resources are not allocated optimally as we looked at in 2.3. So we can therefore shade the welfare loss equal to this red triangle, which represents the decrease in community surplus compared to the socially optimal quantity. So moving on to the final implication, which is the government may then have to intervene again. So they've already intervened once by having the price ceiling, but now they've got a decision whether to intervene again. And that's for two reasons. One is that they have to reduce this shortage. There's a shortage in the market, so the government might want to go, well, okay, we need to solve this. And that's because some consumers cannot buy the product. So they've reduced the price in order to help consumers. But now, because of the shortage, some consumers can't buy it. So maybe the government wants to intervene again. So there's various things they could do. They might substitute producers. So they might subsidize producers. If they subsidize producers, we know that with a subsidy, the supply curve will shift to the right. And if they get the right amount of subsidy, then they're going to be able to move the supply curve to the right to S2, which therefore means that production will now be at 35, which will eliminate the shortage. They could also sell the product themselves. So if they sold the product themselves, it would again increase supply. And if they sold the amount equal to the shortage, then they would be able to shift the supply curve to the right in order to eliminate the shortage. So the problem with this is that now they've intervened twice. They've done the initial intervention, which is the price ceiling to help people. This has caused another problem, which then perhaps requires them to make another intervention. So we can now look at the overall impact onto the market. So we've got three stakeholders: consumers, producers and government, and we've got positive impacts of the price ceiling and negative impacts of the price ceiling. Now there are other stakeholders that we could consider, but these are the main ones in this market. So for consumers, one positive is that some of the consumers are able to pay the lower price. So the ones that's able to buy and find the product are able to pay a lower price. But the negative is that because of the shortage, some might not be able to find and buy the product, which is obviously bad if it's basic necessities such as food or certain types of food. For producers, there's not really many positive impacts. There potentially are some, but in general, most of it's going to be negative. We saw that the revenue is going to go down and there's going to be a lower producer surplus. For the government, they're going to be able to help some consumers, but in general, there's the problems that some consumers might not be able to buy it because of the shortage, so they might have to intervene again to solve the shortage. And there's also a welfare loss that's going to be created, which leads to an inefficient allocation of resources. So in terms of why governments intervene, the price ceiling targets these reasons. Firstly, they help to support households on low income. They influence the level of consumption, and they're aiming to promote equity here. So they're trying to help those people on low incomes, which is going to lead to potentially more equity in the market. Right, that is price ceilings done. So that's got some positive and negative impacts. So next video, we're going to be looking at price floors, which is very similar, but it's going to be a minimum price above equilibrium rather than a maximum price. Okay, I'll see you then.